My name's Beth Butler Fatal. I'm Executive Director of Disability in North Carolina, and I want to welcome you to our third NC Works training webinar series on disability employment. I also want to take this opportunity to model a very simple accommodation request. You see, today you're going to hear from myself, but you're also going to hear from Barton Cutter, our communications specialist, as well as Pat Kuehl, our operations director. And Barton has asked that he understands that sometimes it is difficult for you to understand him when he speaks. And so he has asked for both your patience as well as your transparency, and really encourage you to try and listen with your full attention. And if you miss something that he says, it's okay. Just feel free to interrupt and ask him to repeat himself by using the chat box. He can also contact you directly. You'll have our contact information at the end of today's presentation, and so he encourages that interaction. And so with that, I want to open us up and talk to you a little bit about the North Carolina Employment Collaborative. So the North Carolina Employment Collaborative is a grant that we received and funded through the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities. DisabilityIn North Carolina has been the leader in this initiative, but its overall purpose is really to expand the employment and inclusion of job seekers with disabilities, as outlined in the North Carolina Unified State Plan and mandated under the Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act. The toolkit, as well as the NC Works video that you've received through these trainings, was designed to provide information, resources, and training made available to all of you through the NC Works Career Centers to expand employment opportunities for North Carolinians with disabilities. Next slide. This next slide just demonstrates the diversity and really the collaboration that happened among a number of diverse agencies across the state, including our career centers, NC Commerce, Health and Human Resources, Vocational Rehabilitation, not to leave out the important contributions that our business leaders, as well as our stakeholders with disabilities, contributed to this work. And so right now we're going to jump into our topic for today, and that is the North Carolina Employment First and disability diversity. The next slide will show our goals for today's training. Some of you may have heard about the Employment First initiative or Employment First, but may not understand what that means. So we're going to talk about that. We'll talk in detail about Executive Order 982 and how this executive order and Employment First may impact the work that you're doing day to day. I want to turn over to Barton now, who's going to review some of the statistics and an overview of what we've talked about last week. Barton?
Yeah, so I want to reiterate that it's important that people with disabilities, whether visible or invisible, are accessing your services probably in bigger numbers than the data might show. And because of people's background and experiences, they might be hesitant to self-disclose. At the same time, there may also be people with disabilities who are either not eligible or choose not to also engage services from VR. Having said that, there are also those who are doing both at the same time, and it's important to know that that might not always be evident at first. So the, the bottom line is the more open and comfortable a space you make it for people, the better you are able to serve them. So let's talk a bit about diversity in disability. So, as we probably all know, diversity speaks to the infinite expression through which all humanity manifests. This might include ethnicity, race, gender, age, among other. Disability is a, a natural part of this, and it's important that businesses take steps to incorporate disability into their already present diversity efforts, because disability is a fundamental aspect of our human experience as much as race, gender, or orientation might be. Yet, so often it's by that overlooked. So, uh, I want to turn it over to Pat. Over to you.
Barton, I just was saying that the term you used, the infinite diversity of the human experience, I thought was a lovely way to frame things. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the principle of employment first and where that concept came from. And then Beth will take up the discussion of how the Employment First executive order came about in North Carolina. So employment first is a principle or a concept that actually grew out of services and supports for individuals with cognitive disabilities or autism or other developmental disabilities. And it grew from the notion that for many, many years, we have believed that people with cognitive disabilities, autism, and other developmental disabilities had to be served in segregated sheltered workshops or day programs, and that those were designed ostensibly to prepare them to enter the workforce. And then in the 70s and 80s, there were a number of groundbreaking research studies that resulted in the knowledge that if you provided the right workplace accommodations like job coaching and customized employment, people with cognitive disabilities and autism could in fact be quite successful in competitive jobs. And in fact, we now have decades of this research that demonstrates that if you offer a person the opportunity to work before you offer segregated or specialized programs, they often will seize that opportunity and stay in the workforce. And it'll be better for them, better for society, and we will get the benefit of that wonderful talent. So the employment first concept is also something that we revisit when we talk about individuals that have mental health or substance abuse disorders. Again, we used to believe that you had to be fully recovered as a substance abuse individual, and then you would not be able to work until you were fully recovered. Likewise, we have believed that people with mental health issues had to be fully stabilized before they could be successful in work. Well, the employment first concept applied to this population also has demonstrated about 20 years of very clear research that shows that if you offer individuals with mental health conditions or substance abuse conditions the opportunity to work, even along with their recovery program, that they actually will be far more likely to be compliant with their recovery. They'll recover quicker, and that recovery will be more long-lasting. The essence of this is saying that employment really matters to adults, and disability is, again, just one of the facets of the human experience. So it does not interrupt the need for adults to be working. So now I'm going to turn it over to Beth to frame this into the executive order.
Thank you, Pat. So I don't know if you're aware of the number of North Carolinians with disabilities. If we think about our overall population here in North Carolina, 1.3 million North Carolinians. So if we consider individuals ages 5 and over, that's about 13% of our population here in North Carolina. If we bring that number into more of the employment space, ages 18 to 64, we have about 35% of our population of working age North Carolinians with disabilities employed. So again, we've talked a lot about the disparity, right, within the employment rates, the labor force participation rate. If you think about last week's presentation, so the fact that we have such a difference of opportunities for employment. Again, 35% employment rate for North Carolinians with disabilities compared to 76% employment rate among North Carolinians without disabilities. The Employment First initiative and the Executive Order 92 that was issued back in March of 2019 by Governor Cooper really does challenge our Office of State Human Resources, as well as our North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, to take a closer look at what we can do as a state government, right, to create employment opportunities for this population of North Carolinians with disabilities. Again, it helps the overall state when North Carolinians with disabilities are working. And so this really does address those high levels of unemployment rate. And this executive order really demonstrates our governor's commitment to ensuring that the state should be a role model in this effort. And so when we think about the guidelines that were issued through this executive order, there's really 5 key areas here, 3 of which you can see are noted in red, which are those that we're really going to focus on in today's discussion. So as I'm reading through these and as I'm talking in more detail about these best practices that are really designed to help move the needle when it comes to creating employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities here in our state, I want you to be thinking about how this could apply to the work that you do in the career centers, because later on in just a moment, we're going to open it up for some discussion. And I really want to challenge you to think about ways that you can implement some of these best practices in your career centers and in the work that you do day to day for in your roles. So improving recruitment and outreach efforts, right, to identify and attract qualified individuals with disabilities for those state government positions. Again, you will hear even in the video, I know it's mentioned by Chris Egan through the Department of Health and Human Services commitment by our governor that says, this is really an opportunity for us to step up and be a role model for other employers, including private sector employers, to do better in recruiting and outreach efforts for individuals with disabilities to become employed through these state government positions. Enhancing accessibility of employment applications and facilitating the accommodations during the hiring process. Again, a best practice often used among those companies, even in the private sector, that are finding success in tapping into this talent pool. Implementing clear, reasonable workplace accommodation guidelines, building upon existing state human resource training programs. Well, today's a perfect example of how we are working together to do that, in ensuring that you have access to some rich training around the importance of disability inclusion in employment, identifying opportunities for data collection. Again, we know that there's a lot of work being done to capture data. A lot of that is dependent on some of the work that Barton talked about as well. When we think about self-disclosure, understanding that there's a lot of job seekers that are coming into the career centers every day that may have a hidden disability, but they're choosing not to disclose. So again, capturing that data when we have it available, but encouraging those that may not be disclosing that you are creating a safe place for them to share those accommodation needs and requests. And so as we continue this conversation around improving recruitment and outreach, some examples here are listed, right? Networking with other community partners that serve individuals with disabilities. The importance of creating a welcoming environment. And as we've talked about, the creation of the toolkit as well as the video, that was the purpose of that, really, is to design tools and resources to put in your hands so that you can begin that cultural transformation in your career centers to create, again, a more welcoming experience for those job seekers with disabilities. But an important question, I think, too, and that is, do you have alternative formats for any pamphlets or flyers that you might have? As a job seeker comes into your career center, I know early on in this work, we toured some career centers and beautiful facilities. And yes, I do understand that many of you are still virtual. So the same rule applies, right, in terms of the platforms and the overall experiences of being comfortable with using the built-in accessibility tools in the Teams platform or the Zoom platform or whatever platform you're using to engage job seekers, making sure that all your team members are comfortable with using those tools that are available. But again, asking for your ideas. And so I want to give Jonathan an opportunity to join us now as well. As we really want to encourage some open dialogue and discussion and hear from you about your ideas on ways to more actively recruit and execute this outreach effort. Jonathan?
Thank you, Beth. Okay, folks out in the audience, I just put a question in the chat box asking, what are some of the best practices you do to improve recruitment and outreach? So go ahead and take this time to go ahead and put your responses into complete sentences into the chat box, and we'd love to hear from you.
Jonathan, as you're getting some feedback from our participants today, I do want to mention as well that many of the the companies that we work with have found great success in demonstrating some of these efforts and outreach to community partners. And it's not an expectation that this training or that any training makes you an expert in this space. But instead, it's an opportunity for you to heighten your awareness and build your confidence as you engage in this work.
So, Beth, we're already getting a couple of responses in. One person says network with other agencies or community partners. Have a strong connection with VR. They definitely are great partners for career centers. Have another person that says they have an informational packet about office and agency services that are sent out to other partners that they work with in the community. Somebody else says they use wraparound agencies. Definitely, here's another good one, follow up and follow through. And also local high schools and community colleges. Definitely, those are good resources to pull to. And VR staff provided training at their center as well. So that's really good that Voc Rehab is actually being proactive and reaching out to our career centers because they understand the importance of being able to hire.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely. And I'm sorry. I want to also shout out hugely to local vocational rehabilitation offices. I know that there are tremendous partnerships that exist across our state with NC Works Career Centers. Some even have vocational counselors that are embedded within those offices as well. So again, great example of community partnership.
Would you like a couple more?
I'm sure.
Somebody has on here like this, become an agent of resources. Definitely. Plenty of resources out in the community, but it's good to be an agent for your customers. Let's see, contact with other career center offices and see what they're doing. The final one here is Abound Health loves partnering with other community partners, as well as a handshake for community outreach.
Very good. Very good. Yes, and it's right. Just inviting those partners in to do, and I just saw this pop up, simple lunch and learns, right? That's a great way to again build that partnership and expand your learning around this topic within your career centers. One of the other things I want to point out, and then we can go ahead and move to the next slide, is when you have information, and I heard a lot about, providing resources and information, even a packet that's been put together, it's a great opportunity and time to ask yourself the format in which that information is being shared, right? I know for me, and I've shared this in the past, I've got low vision. And so if you hand me a document with small print, I'm going to have to, I won't be able to read it there, or I'll have to use a magnifying glass, or so a digital format, if an option, is a great way as well to provide that information to someone via an email. But being aware that the alternative format is another demonstration of accessibility to the information and resources that you want to make available to your job seekers. So when we go on and think about best practices, and Jonathan, I know we're going to open this up as well for further discussion and input, but thinking about enhancing the accessibility of the employment application. So I know many of you work closely with employers within your community. And so it's important to include in those conversations the inclusion of applications, asking them, do they have an employment application in alternative format for you to share with job seekers with disabilities that may come into your career center, right? That's a very simple way to highlight your awareness around diversity that includes individuals with disabilities, but it also brings to the attention of those employers that are working with you that you're thinking ahead, and that and some of them may say, oh my goodness, of course, yeah, we have an alternative application format. And let me tell you about our initiative and our focus on disability inclusion strategies at our company, right? It can be a great segue into a deeper conversation about their company's commitment to disability inclusion. I think the other thing is being aware of their willingness to interview in an alternative setting, in creating more accessible interviewing experiences for those job seekers as well. So really helping those employers to promote their disability inclusion strategies is a great way to, again, provide further assistance to job seekers with disabilities. But I'm curious, Jonathan, and I'd love to open it up for other ideas and comments from the audience.
Okay, everyone, here's your chance to weigh in. How does your career center enhance the accessibility for employment? And while we're waiting, we do have a previous comment, Beth, regarding as far as how do you share an alternate application? They only have electronic.
Okay. And so again, having the conversation with the job seeker, is this helpful to you, right? We have the electronic format. Are you able? I mean, would it be more beneficial to have a printed copy? And do you have access to printing a copy, and creating a non-digital version if that's beneficial? But just again, open in those conversations. Do you have any difficulty accessing that digital application? And I've heard some business service reps even suggest, or I'm sorry, counselors, job counselors, suggest that they sit down with the applicant, and maybe that's virtually, maybe that's having the applicant on the phone or job seeker on the phone, but helping them walk through that application if it is digital. So there's a number of ways it's about customer service, right? How can you best serve that job seeker that may have the disability?
Okay, Beth, I have a couple of more comments that are coming in. One person says there's always somebody in the office that's able to assist with applications. Somebody else says that they have headsets that are available. Somebody else says they actually create an application and NC Works. Somebody else also agrees as far as headsets. One that's really interesting is to create an avenue for businesses to share best practices about alternate application formats.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely know as far as what those businesses in the community really do need.
Yeah, that's great. So I think that, and again, so much is online now, and that's fantastic. One of the things that we do challenge, though, our businesses, and I would encourage the career centers and is to ensure that your websites are accessible, right? And ensure that now, if we are moving more and more to that virtual environment, that you are showing up in a way that is welcoming via that website, right? For example, if you have images of job seekers coming to the Career Center, and I know even when we did our face-to-face walkthrough in some of the Career Centers, beautiful art of just huge pictures of folks working on a desktop, or applying for positions and live photos, not overlooking the importance of what it means when someone with a disability walks in and doesn't see themselves in those images, or logs on to your website and doesn't see themselves in the images that are portrayed there of people working. Okay. It sounds very simple, but it's kind of like, oh my gosh, yeah, of course, right? Why aren't we showing more images of individuals with disabilities in these, given these opportunities? So again, we challenge businesses all the time. How are you showing up when you go to job fairs, right? When you are in career fairs? Who's sitting behind the tables, right? Are there individuals with disabilities working in your career center that are employed? Are they front and center? Are they visible? Are they comfortable sharing their story about accommodations and what has been provided or what they need? All of those are things that the private sector leans into through the work that they do in this space. And so again, we can all learn from that. So moving on to the next slide, Jonathan, I think, and then we'll have time at the end for some additional comments. But here's important ways that, again, implementing those clear workplace accommodation guidelines, asking a job seeker what accommodations work for them. And so I think often we get really focused on, gosh, what do we need to do to make our application more accessible? What do we need to do to create a more opening, welcoming work environment? And sometimes, especially if you are working with a job seeker and an employer, right? You know that there's maybe there's a state job that this individual is qualified for, but you're not sure what accommodations that individual may need. It's okay to ask the individual, right, for them to share their experiences related to their employment and their accommodations. What's worked for you in the past? That's a really simple way to open up a conversation. How have you found success in your employment experiences in the past? And if they say, well, I haven't worked but a handful of places, but okay, well, tell me about your educational experiences. Did you need accommodations while you were in school? What did that look like? There's all kinds of ways that you can listen and learn from an individual's experiences that can then, inform the accommodations that may be needed as well. And let me say this, it's okay not to have all the answers. I say that all the time to folks, right? Employers, it's a work in progress. We don't know always what we're going to need until sometimes you get on the job and you may have success and have an accommodation that works. And then guess what? The job changes, right? Or, oh my goodness, your office moves from the building to home, right? So all of a sudden we're all looking to say, okay, geez, we're going to have to rework this accommodation, or our work environments change. So again, staying flexible is important. Becoming familiar with existing accommodation processes and policies. That's really a great way, again, to understand and to be in a position to serve those job seekers as those accommodation needs arise. And then there's just a list of examples, right? There's tremendous partnerships happening and some organizations listed there as ways to partner in your community when it comes to the accommodation needs and technical support needs of individuals with disabilities. But I'm open to ideas. So Jonathan, I want to pause now and hear from the group.
Okay, so folks, I put another question into the chat box here. Does your place of work have a clear and reasonable accommodation guideline? If you do, go ahead and share that. Let's see, we have one career center actually has a TTY phone to accommodate unemployment hearings as well.
Fantastic.
That's always helpful. So we're waiting for some comments to start coming in here.
And so I do want to encourage, I think this is something that we brought up last week as well, and that's an important one, and that is, having an understanding of what that accommodation policy and process looks like in your career center is really, really key. So that's an important piece of this. If it prompts conversation within your career center, that's a good thing.
Okay, here we go. Wider door entrances, and also to within the bathroom facilities. That's excellent. Somebody actually says not sure. How should they address that, Beth?
Yeah. So if you're not sure, again, I would take it back to the depending on where what your role is. But everybody in an NC Works Career Center should know, number one, that there's an accommodation policy in place. But number two, how to access that, and what does that process look like if somebody needs to request accommodation? And that means from a job seeker's perspective, right? A customer that comes in the center, but it's also important for employees, right? Because we know statistically that 1 in 5, Americans has a disability. We heard last week that 74% of people with disabilities have non-visible disabilities. And so I will say to this group, as I've shared with employers, for those that sit back and say, oh, geez, we don't have any persons with disabilities working in our office, I would challenge that. And I would encourage you to step back and really think about, again, the definition of a disability. And I promise you, there are those that very well may have hidden disabilities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in future webinars. But there's a lot of energy that it takes to continue to stay silent and kind of, as I term it, fake it till you make it. Where you're kind of floating along and it doesn't impact you until your performance may be impacted, right? So again, I encourage you to take a deeper look if you're not sure, and have that conversation with your career center director, and bring it up. I think it's an important, healthy conversation to have within a workplace for sure.
So one other thing, if you have just a moment here, somebody else says they have access ramps to both entrances, double doors at both entrances as well, and also to an elevator for being able to transition to and from floors, as well as TTY phone accommodations. It's good.
It is. That's great. That's great. And you can jump to the next slide too while we're talking, because I think we're really winding down to kind of some of the final thoughts and questions for the discussion. And what I'm hearing is a lot of architectural accommodations, right? And we know that architectural barriers are very real. And I do know that there are ADA compliance checks, if you will, audits even of the career centers. I think that you can check in with your career centers and others that have the responsibility, right, of ensuring that the architectural barriers of our career centers are addressed in a way that's obviously, if I'm a job seeker with a disability and I'm a wheelchair user and I can't get in the front door, that's a problem, right? So that is another barrier, but the barriers too that we're talking about when it comes to the accommodations, the process overall, of it's one thing to get in the door, and it's one thing to be able to access the restroom, which is fantastic, but I'm there to get a job, right? I'm there to find employment. And so following that thought process through to ensuring that that the overall processes, and again, the communication, the community, as we've talked about, the community relationships, and the employer conversations that you're having, to promoting those candidates.
And Beth, I'd like to point out that the presence of a job coach for an individual with a cognitive disability, autism, or mental health condition is a reasonable accommodation. And so when you see individuals come to your center with their job coach supporting them, understanding that, welcoming them and assisting the job coach to help their customer to navigate through NC Works. And then the conversations that can extend out to employers who may be in need of individuals, but not have the capacity to do the deeper training without the assistance and support from a professional job coach.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Is job coaches really do make a huge difference in contribution to the needs of an individual with developmental disabilities. So Yes.
And by the way, you can often access job coach organizations through VR because most of the job coaching agencies are vendors with VR. You can also look for them within your community through your community partnerships.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a great way. And I know that some of you, if you're not familiar with the job coach and their purpose, there with the supports of that individual with a developmental disability, I will tell you, it's incredibly helpful. And you say, well, goodness, how do I open that conversation with an employer that may be interested? But does that mean they're hiring one person, or does that mean they're hiring two people? Right? Pat, what would your response be to that?
My response is you are hiring one person, and the job coach is simply the reasonable accommodation that will assist and support you so that they can do the deeper training that may be unreasonable to ask of you because it may take more time or more specialization. That said, I also want to point out that there are job coaches that support people with mental health conditions, and usually those accommodations are around assisting the individual and supporting them as they work to find a job accommodation that works with whatever medication they be under or whatever their productivity is in terms of the best time of the day for them to be working, or asking for accommodations if there is a flare of a particular condition such as depression. So more that kind of job coach does more of their support beside the individual and outside of work, whereas the job coach for someone with cognitive disabilities might assist with the actual training on the job. And if you want more information on this, this is something we can backfill for more questions, or just contact us.
Great. Thank you. Jonathan, are there any other questions or comments before we close?
Yes. We also have on here, in case you folks out there are not aware, Mose Dorsey with the Division of Workforce Solutions is our ADA monitor. So if you're unable to get an answer to a question through your Career Center manager or your supervisor, go ahead and feel free to reach out to Mose Dorsey, and he'll be happy to fill those questions for you.
Fantastic. And so with that, let's go to the final slide. And I know we've really covered a lot of territory today with open discussion. And as we do with in other sessions, we're going to wrap this up with really just kind of bringing it back to the practical applications of today's conversation. But I want to encourage you to share your experiences. And Jonathan, you can kind of walk us through these questions. But this is really the opportunity for you all to share with us kind of what you've learned today and kind of how you're going to apply this as you go forward.
Go ahead and share your experiences with using the accommodations process. Okay, let's go ahead and just start off. Someone says they continue to do outreach with Violet, and they said this has helped. There also, somebody else says they're assisting individuals virtually by phone and through the NCWorks chat.
Yeah, that's great. Having the feature of chat that sounds so simple because we all use it, right? Or so many of us do. I say that. I probably don't use it that as much, but absolutely, a lot of folks do use that chat box, and that has been super helpful to open communication. So.
Someone says here they've incorporated flexible virtual appointments in addition to in-person, depending as far as what that individual's preference or how they feel comfortable as far as the type of service they need to receive. As far as NCWorks chat, go ahead and I'll speak to this. Go ahead and contact your either supervisor or your area super user, especially if you're a new employee, and they'll be able to assist you with that.
Yeah, that's great. And how cool would it be, right? That through these webinars, that just by raising the conversation around the accommodation process, that we are opening doors to communication and maybe even, right, prompting some employees, right, that are working in the career centers now to say, man, this is awesome. We're talking about this, and maybe it's a time for me to share my story and to disclose that it would be helpful if I had X, right? If I had some support, um, how much more effective I could be in the role that I'm in. It's a positive. And I want to encourage you all to think about that as you continue to engage with your team members in your career centers, as well as promoting this within the customers and the job seekers that you work with daily.
Excellent. I've got one other comment in here. Someone shared that they assisted an individual with PTSD after military service, and they actually had to be assisted in a more quiet environment.
Great, absolutely, absolutely, and I know that Pat and I, before everything was shut down, we spent a lot of time in some of the career centers, and amazed by the layout, that the thoughtfulness that went behind some of the layout and the office setup to create just that, quiet rooms for individuals that if that was a distraction, or if they requested or needed that type of assistance, that there were accommodations and rooms available for just that. So fantastic.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I do want to encourage, as we go through this process, any orientations, right, that you offer in your training centers, any training that is offered, upskills training and other types of trainings, being sure that there's an opportunity to invite individuals that may need an accommodation to maximize their benefits and their level of engagement in that particular training. That's a great way to introduce and invite folks to share any accommodation needs they might have.
If you've got time for one more comment here, somebody has found that most employers are willing to provide accommodations with supportive documentation as far as the process of helping customers working with VR Case Manager to use, and they call theirs a comfortable room.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Like that.
Absolutely, yeah. We often encourage, again, on the private sector side, there's quiet rooms, rooms where individuals can just go and have a low lighting or natural light, someplace where there's a window, and maybe even a white noise machine, and just a place that they can step away from. Because again, depending on what size your career center is, as we move back to more face to face, it gets pretty busy in some of these centers. There's a lot going on, and so being mindful of that and how that could be a distraction in some instances for some individuals.
So let's ask the question to the audience. What steps are you ready to go ahead and take based on what you've learned today?
And as they're coming up with those final action steps, I want to invite Barton and Pat to provide any other comments that they might have. I know I've talked a lot today, but welcome any comments and closing thoughts they might have.
So I'll jump in here, and folks, don't forget that we have Employment First in our state now. So be looking more seriously at those state jobs. Sometimes those are hard to apply for and might require a little bit more of your time in order to facilitate that application process. Barton?
Yeah, I noticed people talking about the importance of serious and web access. The other big accommodation to bear in mind with web applications is having awareness around whether or not the system times out, because a lot of people with disabilities, whether visual or otherwise, require more time to do the application if they're doing it themselves. So that
Thank
yeah.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. I'm like putting amen, amen down on my paper. That is an absolute brilliant comment and call out. Oh, I cannot tell you how frustrating that can be. Um, oh my goodness. So you are so right. So as you guys walk through your process, and here's the thing, here's the beauty of a community partner like VR or like the Division of Services for the Blind. I promise you there are individuals that would be willing to come into your center and walk through your process. And give you some feedback about their experience. Don't hesitate to do that, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I feel certain that you can find partners in your community that would offer up those stakeholders there with disabilities in your community to come in and walk through those experiences. But no, you are absolutely right. And think about not just the online or the web-based application, but how much of what we do now is automated where we have our little phones with us, right? And you are punching in numbers that may be long numbers. And I will tell you, it is, oh my goodness. If I'm not given enough time to look down and then push the number and then look back over at a piece of paper and lift up my magnifier, absolutely. We've got to make sure you're giving individuals enough time to complete those processes. That is such a good point. Jonathan, are there any other final comments from the group? We have really appreciated the rich conversation today.
Actually, we do. One center that actually is going to have VR coming out to do the windmills training with them in March. They also, somebody else says they offer workshops for employers, customers, and staff on what reasonable accommodations are. That's really good because that really does support what you were talking about, Beth, as far as getting this conversation started, keep those conversations going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sharing your commitment to this work with your employer partners is really key. So,
and here's a tidbit of information here. Relax, take your time, ask questions, and most importantly, listen.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think that's a great way to close out today's session. Jonathan, what do you think?
I agree with you, Beth.
Great. So I want to thank you all. We are so excited about the level of engagement that we're seeing, which really confirms for us that this is a need. And if we're not, building the strength and building your confidence, then we're not achieving our goals here. So again, thank you for your interest. Thank you for your candidness in sharing your experiences. And I want to invite you back next week, February 3rd, when we will talk in more detail about disability employment inclusion and the business case. So for all of you business service reps and for vocational rehabilitation partners, the business relations reps that deal day in and day out with building that employer relationship, I want to encourage you to join us next week